Hey everybody, this is Lawrence, and welcome to another episode of Dirty Basement Terrain. Now, a while ago I was in Dollar Tree, and I saw these packs of these like cutesy mushroom things. I grabbed a bunch of them thinking, I might do something with them later. Well, they sat in my store, or my parts bin for a couple months, and then along came this challenge that, and I love doing challenges, called Dangerous Scatter Terrain. And I was like, oh, I have those mushrooms. I'm going to grab those. I can do something with those. So I sat and looked at them for a minute, and I was like, yeah, I can work with this. Well, what I eventually wound up with was this. I don't know, kind of monster mushroom things. They can't move or nothing, but they're dangerous, and you can put them wherever you want on the board. So that counts as dangerous scatter terrain. But let me say, challenge pieces when doing challenges, it takes you to, it stretches your imagination and will give you ideas and get you to do things you normally would never do. That's why I enjoy doing challenge pieces so much. They are fun, and you're going to wind up with a cool piece of terrain or whatever at the end of it. I prefer the challenges versus contests, because challenges, it's more like everybody saying, hey, this is my interpretation of what the theme was, not unlike contests where I'm doing better than you. I don't enjoy that. That's not fun. So if you know of a spot where challenges are going on, take part in it. It's fun. And you'll do stuff you never thought of doing before. So, like I said, I turned one of these into this, all because of a challenge. I'm going to show you how I work through this. The different steps I used and took to get to this spot. Don't have to follow along. I'm just showing you how I came up with this monster mushroom thing. Alright, enjoy, guys.
Okay, I'm basically going to take one of the mushrooms, and I'm using a Sharpie here. Draw out the basic shape of the mouth. I'm just trying to give myself a rough idea of where I want to cut the mouth out. And using my X-Acto blade, I'm going to semi-follow along with the pattern I just drew out. And then just cut along the line so I can actually wind up popping out this chunk of foam for the mouth. And once I do get it done, I'm going to grab one of my carving tools just to basically pop it out. Easy. You can use your fingers if you want. I just like using the tool. And here I'm grabbing a bunch of tentacles pieces from the Final Faction toys from the Dollar Tree, the tentacle pack, and I'm just cutting off the individual tentacles from the tentacle piece that I got. And here with a pair of side snips, I'm cutting off the pointy ends of some toothpicks that I intend to use for teeth. And for now, I'm just storing them in this little cup. I'm making 6 of these, so I need a lot of teeth. So I think I wind up overcutting what I need, but I'd rather have more than I need than need more than I have. So here I picked up a couple packs of these little wooden mushrooms from the Dollar Tree. Thanks, Dungeon Matron, for letting me know. Some have rounded heads and some have more of a cone-shaped cap. Here I'm making some guide holes for the teeth that I'll be inserting with a regular toothpick that I haven't cut. This will just make it easier for inserting the teeth. Now I'm grabbing some needle nose pliers because that small space is not friendly to my fingers. I'm dipping the blunt end of the tooth into some Aleene's tacky glue, and then I'm inserting it. And once it dries, they'll hold fine. Now for the bases, I'm using these little round, like 3¼ inch square circles I picked up at Wally World. And I'm grabbing a scrap piece of foam, trace a pattern of the wooden circle around, and just trimming it down so it'll eventually fit on top. I'm doing this because I don't want the mushrooms to sit directly onto the wooden base. I want to have to raise it up a little bit. So this scrap piece of foam, I think, is about 1/2 inch thick, maybe an inch. I'm not sure. I honestly was just, I think I was using actually both, and I was just grabbing out of my scrap bin. And here I'm just using some of the tacky glue, and brushing it on, then attaching it to the base. This part's pretty self-explanatory. I'm using my Olfa knife just to trim off the sharp edge. And here I'm just kind of like test fitting the mushrooms. Now, they have rounded bottoms, so that's really not going to work. So I shaved off a flat spot to attach it to the foam. Now here I'm actually grabbing a pine cone. This was some decorative stuff from Christmas that my significant other gave me, and the individual pieces actually make some great looking like moss mushrooms. So I'm pulling off a bunch of these, and then I'm going to trim them up so I can use them. You know, there's like that fungus mushrooms that grow on the side of trees and then just kind of stick out like little shells. That's exactly what it looks like once it's painted up and done. So I'm grabbing a bunch of them, probably a lot more than what I need, and yeah, that's about it. You are eventually going to have to trim these up because, you know, you don't want that long piece. It's unnecessary, so you can do that with a simple pair of scissors, honestly. And of course here I'm grabbing one of my favorite sculpting materials, Sculptamold. You can get this stuff off of Amazon. It's relatively cheap and it doesn't take much, especially if you do what I did and use scrap pieces of foam to build up the height you need prior to using it. Now this is basically 2 parts Sculptamold, the 1 part water, get it to like the consistency of, well, like everybody says, cottage cheese. Looks tasty, don't it? Don't eat it. And then basically I'm using a popsicle stick to smear it onto where I need it, and I will also be using that same popsicle stick to smooth it out. I know a lot of people like to just use their fingers, but I don't. I sometimes try to avoid the mess even though I am dirty basement terrain. But yeah, I mean, this gives it a smooth appearance, and relatively, it does have a bit of a rough finish to it, but in the end it works. Now these next 2 steps are easier if you do this before the Sculptamold dries hard. I'm taking some of those smaller wooden mushrooms and just basically I'm pressing it into the Sculptamold, and then I'm smoothing up the Sculptamold around the base of the smaller mushrooms, and that will hold it securely. Now I'm taking some of those pine cone pieces and just basically pressing it right into the Sculptamold. You might have to go back later because some of them might come out and use some hot glue to stick them in, but for the most part they will hold. Of course here I'm adding some roots to the mushrooms using an old DM Scotty trick, hot glue. Basically start kind of thick up at the base of the mushroom, just kind of in a not straight line. Run it down the base and thin it out towards the end. They make perfect looking roots. They really do. Now the caps of these mushrooms were just too rounded for me, so I grabbed these small half spherical sticker bead things you can get pretty much at any craft store. I just stuck a few, I think like 5, in random places on the cap of the mushroom just to give it a little more interest. Of course, here I'm going to be using another DM Scotty trick. I'm not using paper towels like he does often. I'm using napkins. They're the same thing. And I'm using a 50-50 mix of PVA, standard Elmer's, and water. And then I'm going to be brushing it on to the napkin, trimming off some pieces because it's a little big. And this will make some wrinkles and whatnot, but I actually wanted that just for some visual interest because I didn't want smooth and perfect. I want it nasty looking. And for the parts that hang over the edge, that's no problem. Just brush it up underneath the cap. Chances are that will never be seen anyway. But the water and PVA, once it's dry, it's going to be rock solid and very hard. And we'll also hold those hemispherical stickers that we put on earlier. That's why you didn't see me using glue, because I knew I was going to be doing this. Here I'm going to be adding the tentacles to the mushrooms. I'm just basically pressing the base of the mushroom into the foam of the mushrooms, and I'm going to cut out that impression a little bit deeper for each tentacle, then pick it out with my sculpting tool and test fitting it. Then I'll just put in a dollop of hot glue and then stick in the tentacle, and boom, I got a tentacle in the mushroom. I'm going to be adding 2 tentacles to the mushroom and 1 tentacle to the base. I think that works. At least when I was making these, I did. So that's what I went with for all 6 of my mushrooms. And for the base, it is sculpt to mold, and it is harder, but the same basic process still works. Now I'm grabbing my homemade texture paste, and I'm going to be painting it on to the stem of the mushroom and also the roots, both of which were just too smooth for my taste, and I didn't want to go the paper towel route. And I do have this paste, and it's going to work for what I want, so that's why I grabbed it. And like I said, I just wanted to add some texture to the stem and the roots because they were just too smooth for what I was going for. No Mod Podge for this step. It's not needed because there's already enough stuff on to protect everything. Here I'm just grabbing some Surface Primer Black from Vallejo and running it through my airbrush. You can actually use a rattle cam with no problem in this step. I tend not to use rattle cans because I just don't feel like going outside and doing it. That's all the only reason I'm using my airbrush for this step instead of a rattle can. Because I'm lazy at this part. I don't have to get up and go outside and drag everything out and then drag everything back, so I'm going to go with the airbrush instead of using a rattle can. But if you don't have an airbrush, a rattle can will absolutely do this step with no problem. And of course, here I'm using some surface primer gray. It's a light gray, really. And I'm going to add a zenithal highlight. I'm not using white because I really don't want bright. I want more of a toned down zenithal with this. So I chose to go with the gray. And it works pretty well. So as you can see, eventually it does brighten up pretty well. So the white is just not needed. Now here I'm grabbing some Citadel Contrast Nazdrag Yellow. I'm going to be using that on the stems of the mushrooms and the roots. I like this color, and that's why I'm using it, and it basically does a lot of the work for me. That's why I'm using the contrast paint on this. Typically I don't like to use the expensive stuff on terrain, but in this case it just solved a lot of steps for me to do it this way. So, like I said, I went with the Nazdrag Yellow for the stem and the roots. And here I'm grabbing another contrast paint, Flesh Terrors Red, for painting the caps. I just kind of went with the classic yellow stems and red caps for these mushrooms. No real reason, I just felt like it. And I was like, at the moment, it's the colors I like, so that's what I went with. And again, I'm using the contrast paint because it just solved a lot of steps for me for later, no dry brushing or anything after that. So I just went straight with the contrast paint. I took a shortcut, to be honest. Like every last one of us will do if we can. And of course here I'm using, yet again, another contrast paint, Griffhound Orange. It seemed like a cool color to use, so I grabbed it and I'm painting it on all the tentacles. Because for some reason, in my head, the tentacles just said orange. So that's the color I went with. And for some reason, the mouths themselves were screaming they need to be like a pale green. So I went with contrast gut rip of flesh. And it seemed to work. So I'm glad I chose it. Of course, in this steps, I'm going with Apple Barrel's Burnt Umber for doing dirt. It's a good base. I like that because it's a good base color for dirt. It's a bit tedious trying to get around those little mushrooms, all the roots, the little pine cone fungus things I did. But it eventually works out, and it takes a little bit of time getting around all that, but like I said, it works out and it winds up being beneficial to what I wanted. And for a mid-tone brown on the dirt areas, I'm going with Apple Barrel's Nutmeg Brown. I said, it's just a brown. I'm going for around 85% coverage on this. I said, this is just a mid-tone color. And again, can be a little bit tedious trying to avoid all the roots and everything else that's on the base, but it's worth it and it works. And here I'm going with Apple Barrel's Territorial Beige for the highlight coat, or a light dry brush with a cheap Dollar Tree makeup brush. Gotta love the Dollar Tree. But like I said, this is just for the final light dry brush over the dirt areas. And this isn't quite as tedious as the previous two steps because you don't even have to get that close to the roots and all that other stuff. So it's a lot easier than the previous two steps. I hadn't painted the pine cone fungus things yet because I was debating on what color I wanted. And then I actually just went and grabbed the Nasdrag yellow and painted them the same color as the roots and the stem of the mushroom. So I could have done that a while ago, but I hadn't made my mind up. So and all those bumps that I had put on the caps of the mushrooms, I never planned on letting them just be red. So I grabbed some apple barrel ivory and just started painting them that color. Though they're not going to stay that color, that's not my intentions either. And here I'm grabbing the apple barrel ivory again just to paint the teeth. I didn't want them to be white, I wanted them to be a little bit yellowish, so the ivory color worked perfect for the teeth. And here I grabbed the Nasdrag yellow contrast paint again, and I'm hitting all the little dots or bumps on the top of the mushroom just to give it, that's what I wanted. It seemed to work for me. And here I'm grabbing my ground cover. It's just some swamp grass flocking. I don't remember the manufacturer. And I'm also grabbing some tea leaves, Earl Grey to be specific, and now I'm painting on a 50-50 mix of PVA and water to where I want to put the ground cover. And it's quite simple. I'm just sprinkling it on. I'm not going for full coverage. I don't want that for this. It's my personal preference. And then I'll grab some of the tea and then sprinkle on some of those too. Only a little bit will stick, but that's the look I'm going for. I don't want complete and full coverage with this. And now I'm just adding grass tufts. I'm using Army Painter Swamp Tufts, and I'm using Huge Miniatures Muddy Tufts. Those two colors seem to work for what I want. I'm pretty confident you all know how to put tufts on. It's best. I'm using Aleene's Tacky Glue because that's just my go-to, but it's just a little bit of glue on the bottom and then stick it to where you want to put it. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And here I'm adding some tall grass tufts that I made using Woodland Scenic's field grass of various colors. I'm punching a hole in where I want it to go. I'm dipping the end in some PVA, and then I'm going to stick it where it goes. Now these tentacles have like little thorns on them, and I wanted them to stand out. So I grabbed the ivory from Apple Barrel and just painted all the thorns that color just to make them look a little more menacing. I would like to say prior to this step I had given all the tentacles a wash using Seraphim Sepia shade because the orange was just a little too bright for my taking, and the sepia wash just toned it down to the perfect shade that I wanted. And here they all are done, looking nice and pretty. These are not something you adventurers want to come across if they're not paying attention in a jungle or wherever.
Hey everybody, if you made it this far, it means you watched it to the end, and then as always, I really do appreciate that. If you like what you saw, click like. If you want to see more, click subscribe. I'm always crafting, so I'm turning the camera on, so there will be more videos. If you want to leave a comment down below or off the side or wherever. If you want to get a hold of me directly, there's a link to my Discord page on the About tab of the Dirty Basement Terrain homepage. Go there, lots of people there talking about whatever. Uh, Tips, advice, you want to show off your stuff there, be a great place to go. Hope to see you the guys there. And as always, guys, when you're making terrain, the only person you got to worry about is you, because it's your terrain.